Hello everyone, I am Kapila, your English teacher, and today we'll take up the chapter A Triumph of Surgery from the book Footprints Without Feet. You can download the book from the link given in the description. This chapter is written by James Herriot. James Herriot was an English veterinary doctor, and this James Herriot is his pen name. He has written a series of books of stories of animals and their masters. Here also we have one such story of a dog named Tricky, who was dearly loved by his mistress, who was really very rich, that is Mrs. Pumphrey, and she loved the dog so much that she gave him so much to eat that he became ill because of that love that she showered upon that dog. Then what happened? What did the doctor do? All that we shall read here in this chapter. Let's begin. I was really worried about Tricky this time. I had pulled up my car when I saw him in the street with his mistress, and I was shocked at his appearance. He had become hugely fat, like a bloated sausage, with a leg at each corner. His eyes, bloodshot and rheumy, red and wet, stared straight ahead, and his tongue lolled from his jaws. So like that only, the tongue was lying there, it was coming out, and it had become a bloated sausage. Sausage, you know what the shape of the sausage is. It is like a long cylinder. So like that it was, with 4 legs, as if somebody had filled in air inside the dog. So he was really worried. And who is he? Who is I over here? I is the narrator, James Herriot over here. Mrs. Pumphrey hastened to explain. He was so listless, Mr. Herriot. He seemed to have no energy. So listless is without energy. I thought he must be suffering from malnutrition. So this is out of love that she's saying malnutrition. Otherwise she was feeding him so much. So I have been giving him some little extras between meals to build him up. Some malt and cod liver oil and a bowl of Horlicks at night to make him sleep. Nothing much really. So because of that love, she thought that the energy was missing, and that is why she started giving him extra meals apart from the normal meal time, the meals that she used to give. And what all did she give? She gave some malt, cod liver oil and a bowl of Horlicks. So this was the extra that she gave to Tricky. And did you cut down on the sweet things as I told you? Oh, I did for a bit. But he seemed to be so weak, I had to relent. So she could not be so harsh. She had to soften down. She had to give away that harshness. She could not be so strict with Tricky so as to cut down the sweets, because he really loved sweets. He does love cream cakes and chocolates, so I can't bear to refuse him. Because of that love that she has, because of that she is not able to refuse to him. I looked down again at the little dog. That was the trouble. Tricky's only fault was greed. He had never been known to refuse food. He would tackle a meal at any hour of the day or night. And I wondered about all the things Mrs. Pumphrey hadn't mentioned. So the main problem with Tricky was greed. Any time of the day you give him any meal, he would be able to eat it. And he was wondering, the doctor was wondering, that only these many things she has mentioned, that she has been giving this and this, cod liver oil and malt and Horlicks. What about those things that she has not mentioned? She must be giving, because when you love somebody, you are ready to do anything out of that love. So that thing Mrs. Pumphrey was also doing. Out of the love that she had for Tricky, she was giving him a lot to eat, more than that was required. Are you giving him plenty of exercise? Well, he has his little walks with me, as you can see, but Hodgin the gardener has been down with lumbago, so there has been no ring throwing lately. So she told the doctor when the doctor inquired if the exercises were being given to the dog there. She told only the little walks because Hodgin was suffering from backache and so he could not do the ring throwing exercise. You must have seen dogs jumping out of the rings. They jump through the ring. So that exercise was not being done as the gardener wasn't keeping well. I tried to sound severe. Now I really mean this. If you don't cut his food right down and give him more exercise, he's going to be really ill. You must harden your heart and keep him on a very strict diet. So the doctor was really worried to see the condition of Tricky, and that is why very harshly he told Mrs. Pumphrey to be really strict and keep him on a diet that was suggested by him only. Mrs. Pumphrey wrung her hands. "Oh, I will, Mr. Harriet. I'm sure you are right, but it is so difficult, so very difficult." She set off, head down along the road as if determined to put the new regime into practice immediately. So when you're confused and you don't know what to do, often you wrung your hands like this, like Mrs. Pumphrey did, both the hands like this you do. So that way she did, and then she set off with the head down and as if telling the doctor there that she would be following the rules, the regimes immediately. But she told the doctor that it was really very, very difficult because she loved Tricky so much that she couldn't take away the food from him. That was the reason, the love, that was the reason there. I watched their progress with growing concern. Tricky was tottering along in his little tweed coat. So tottering is walking with great difficulty. He had a whole wardrobe of these coats and for the cold weather and a raincoat for the wet days. He struggled on, drooping in his harness. Harness is the leather strap that is there, and he was hanging there. It appeared as if he was just hanging like that and then walking. I thought it wouldn't be long before I heard from Mrs. Pumphrey. So looking at the condition, he knew very well, the doctor, that very soon Mrs. Pumphrey would be giving a call to him and something must be wrong with the dog there. The expected call came within a few days. Mrs. Pumphrey was distraught. She was completely, broken down. She did not know what to do. Tricky would eat nothing, refused even his favorite dishes, and besides, he had bouts of vomits, rounds, fits that you have, rounds of vomiting he had. He spent all his time lying on a rug, panting, didn't want to go for walks, didn't want to do anything. So he was breathing with difficulty. He was panting all the time. He was just lying down and not doing anything. So she was completely broken down in grief, Mrs. Pumphrey, because she loved the dog like her own child, right? I had made my plans in advance. The only way to get Tricky out of the house for a period, I suggested that he be hospitalized for about a fortnight to be kept under observation. So the doctor had already thought what he would be doing. He would be hospitalizing the dog. The poor lady almost swooned. She was sure he would pine and die if he did not see her every day. She was about to faint. She almost fainted because she knew that the dog would die if he would not see the mistress. So out of the longing, pining, the love that was the connection between Mrs. Pumphrey and the dog Tricky. But I took a firm line, but he was very much determined. He was adamant that no, Tricky had to be hospitalized. Tricky was very ill and this was the only way to save him. In fact, I thought it best to take him without delay, and followed by Mrs. Pumphrey's wailings. Obviously, she started crying and shouting. She did not want to part away with Tricky. I marched out to the car carrying the little dog wrapped in a blanket. The entire staff was roused and maids rushed in and out bringing his daybed, his nightbed, favorite cushions, toys and rubber rings, breakfast bowl, lunch bowl, supper bowl. Realizing that my car would not hold all the stuff, I started to drive away. So this was the pampering that Tricky used to get. Different beds he had, all for separate bowls, for separate time of meals, right? So all this stuff what was to be put in the car, the doctor realized it would not be the car would not be able to accommodate it all, so he started driving the car. As I moved off, Mrs. Pumphrey, with a despairing cry in grief, threw an armful of little coats through the window. I looked in the mirror before I turned the corner of the drive. Everybody was in tears. Out on the road, I glanced down at the pathetic little animal, gasping on the seat by my side. Again, he was panting, he was gasping. I patted the head, and Tricky made a brave effort to wag his tail. Poor old lad, I said. You haven't a kick in you, but I think I know a cure for you. You haven't a kick in you is the zeal in you. You don't have that thing inside you, but still I know a cure for you. So he did not have it inside him, but the doctor knew a cure for him. At the surgery, the household dogs surged round me. Tricky looked down at the noisy pack with dull eyes and when put down, lay motionless on the carpet. The other dogs, after sniffing round him for a few seconds, decided he was an uninteresting object and ignored him. So at the surgeries, at the clinic or at the hospital, the other dogs, they came, they surrounded him, they sniffed him, they smelled him through their nose and they found him very uninteresting, so they left him there. I made up a bed for him in a warm loose box next to the one where the other dogs slept. For 2 days I kept an eye on him, giving him no food but plenty of water. At the end of the second day, he started to show some interest in his surroundings, and on the third day, he began to whimper when he heard the dogs in the yard. So, for 2 days, he was not given any food, only water. He was kept under observation, and then he started to show a slight movement after 2 days, and on the third day, he even started crying, whimpered. He cried when he heard the cries of the other dogs in the yard. When I opened the door, Tricky trotted out and was immediately engulfed by Joe, the greyhound, and his friends. So the door was opened by the doctor and he trotted out. Still he was moving with difficulty, and as soon as he moved out, then Joe, that is the greyhound, one breed of dog, that engulfed him. Engulfed doesn't mean to eat up over here, rather it means attacked or surrounded him. He and his friends, they had surrounded him. After rolling him over and thoroughly inspecting him, the dogs moved off down the garden. Tricky followed them, rolling slightly with his surplus fat. So a lot of fat was there on the body, and still with that, after they had inspected him well, they had pushed him down, they had thoroughly, rolled him off, then he also moved along with that pack of dogs. Later that day, I was present at feeding time. I watched while Tristan slopped the food into the bowls. So the food got spilled when it was being served to the dogs there in the bowls. And who was serving the food? Tristan, that is the name of the person. There was the usual headlong rush. You keep your head forward and then you rush. So that headlong rush was there, followed by the sounds of high speed eating. When dogs eat very quickly, then there's certain sound. So that sound came. Every dog knew that if he fell behind the others, he was liable to have some competition for the last part of his meal. Because if you are not going to be in this race, then you will be lagging behind, and then you'll have to fight for the last part of the meal. Okay, you'll be lacking. When they had finished, Tricky took a walk round the shining bowls, licking casually inside one or two of them. Next day, an extra bowl was put out for him, and I was pleased to see him jostling his way towards it. So he was also, trying to find out. He also entered into that rush. So he jostled his way, he got through his way, and he had already seen the previous day how the rush was there, how the race was there for the food. So the author was really happy to see it. From then on, his progress was rapid. He had no medicinal treatment of any kind but all day he ran about with the dogs, joining in their friendly scrimmages, little fights that the dog had. So in that he used to join them. All day he used to run with those dogs. He discovered the joys of being bowled over, tramped on and squashed every few minutes. These are the games that the dogs play. He became an accepted member of the gang, an unlikely, silky little object among the shaggy crew. So the whole crew that was shaggy, it wasn't good looking, it was shaggy, and he was very silky there. Fighting like a tiger for his share at mealtimes and hunting rats in the old hen house at night. He had never had such a time in his life. So now he was enjoying. He was doing those things which he had never done earlier. So what were those things? Having fun with the pack of dogs that had become his friends, and he was hunting the hens in the night. All that he was doing. All the while, Mrs. Pumphrey hovered anxiously in the background, ringing a dozen times a day for the latest bulletins, that is the latest news about the dog. I dodged the questions about whether his cushions were being turned regularly or his correct coat worn according to the weather, but I was able to tell her that the little fellow was out of danger and convalescing rapidly. Convalescing is he was improving his health rapidly. This was what he told, but he used to dodge the questions about the cushions and the coats, etc. That is, he used to run away. So he used to bluff and he used to keep away from those questions, anyhow changing the talk and the topic. But yes, he let Mrs. Pumphrey know that there was rapid improvement in the health of that dog, but it is going to take time, right? The word convalescing seemed to do something to Mrs. Pumphrey. She started to bring round fresh eggs, 24 at a time, to build up Tricky's strength. For a happy period, my partners and I had 2 eggs each for breakfast, but when the bottles of wine began to arrive, the real possibilities of the situation began to dawn on the household. So they were so happy to have the fresh eggs and the bottle of wine which used to come over there, and it was a new beginning for the possibilities of the breakfast that they used to have. Mrs. Pumphrey, as soon as she came to know about the improvement in the health, out of all the love that she had for Tricky, she started sending those things there at the surgery. It was to enrich Tricky's blood. The wine that was sent there, it was to enrich Tricky's blood. Lunch became a ceremonial occasion with 2 glasses of wine before and several during the meal. We could hardly believe it when the brandy came to put a final edge on Tricky's constitution. So now, to improve his body, his strength, now finally brandy was also sent after the eggs and the wine. For a few nights, the fine spirit was rolled around, inhaled and reverently drunk. So they all used to have fun. The people there at the surgery, they drank the wine along with rum, and they had eggs for breakfast. So they were all enjoying. They were days of deep content, starting well with the extra egg in the morning, improved and sustained by the midday wine, and finishing luxuriously round the fire with the brandy. So this is how very contented they were, because breakfast, lunch and dinner was being enjoyed in all the manner with the help of the things that Mrs. Pumphrey had sent for the body and strength of Tricky. He was not given anything or any of those things which she used to send. It was a temptation to keep Tricky on as a permanent guest, but I knew Mrs. Pumphrey was suffering, and after a fortnight felt compelled to phone and tell her that the little dog had recovered and was awaiting collection. So obviously, if so many things would be sent by the mistress, then it would be a temptation that we should keep Tricky forever as a permanent guest. But he really knew how much painful it was for Mrs. Pumphrey and how much she would be longing. So after a fortnight, he rang and he told her that she could collect the dog. Within minutes, about 30 feet of gleaming black metal drew up outside the surgery. The chauffeur opened the door, and I could just make out the figure of Mrs. Pumphrey, almost lost in the interior. Her hands were tightly clasped in front of her. Her lips trembled. Oh, Mr. Harriet, do tell me the truth. Is he really better? So you can see the love that she had, the care, and how much anxious she is to know about the health of the dog. She's clasping the hands, her lips are trembling. So that was the connection, and that was the intense love that she had for the dog there. Yes, he's fine. There's no need for you to get out of the car. I'll go and fetch him. I walked through the house into the garden. A mass of dogs was hurtling round and round the lawn, and in their midst, ears flapping, tail waving, was the little golden figure of Tricky. So they were running around there, a mass of dogs, and in between them, he was flapping his ears like this. He was flapping the ears, and he was waving there. And in among those dogs, he was the one who was golden. In 2 weeks, he had been transformed into a lithe, hard-muscled animal. He was keeping up well with the pack, stretching out in great bounds, his chest almost brushing the ground. So he had become really healthy. He was neither too thin nor too fat. I carried him back along the passage to the front of the house. The chauffeur was still holding the car door open, and when Tricky saw his mistress, he took off from my arms in a tremendous leap. He literally jumped and sailed into Mrs. Pumphrey's lap. She gave a startled "oh," and then had to defend herself as he swarmed over her, as he jumped over her, all over her, licking her face and barking. During the excitement, I helped the chauffeur to bring out the beds, toys, cushions, coats, and bowls, none of which had been used. As the car moved away, Mrs. Pumphrey leaned out of the window. Tears shone in her eyes. Her lips trembled. So that was the kind of love that she had for the animal. That tears were there in the eyes. The eyes were shining with tears. Oh, Mr. Harriet, she cried. How can I ever thank you? This is a triumph of surgery. So she thought that an operation had been done on Tricky, and they stood victorious. And Tricky had become a healthy dog because of that, and she was thankful to Mr. Harriet for it. Now let us discuss the questionnaire. What kind of a person do you think the narrator, a veterinary surgeon, is? Would you say he is tactful as well as full of common sense? Yes, the narrator is very tactful and he is full of common sense, because he tells Mrs. Pumphrey that the dog has to be hospitalized, and when the mistress asks questions about the cushions and the bowls, etc., he dodges the questions and he only informs about the improvement that was there. He doesn't tell about the real treatment. So he had a lot of common sense also, and he was very tactful also. Do you think Tricky was happy to go home? What do you think will happen now? Tricky was really very happy to go home. We come to know about it. As soon as he sees the mistress there in the car, he just takes a tremendous leap and he jumps into her lap, and then he licks the mistress all over. This tells us that he was really happy. Now, if the mistress continues with the same kind of diet, maybe again he would become fat and he would become ill. Do you think this is a real life episode or mere fiction? Or is it a mixture of both? I think it is a real life incident, because the writer here was a veterinary doctor and he wrote storybooks about the animals and their masters. Whatever he came across, whatever he came to know about them, that only he has written in the stories. So maybe a little bit of fiction he has used, but overall it's a real story for me. And if you have some other answer, you can write that also, but then you'll have to justify your answer. This episode describes the silly behavior of a rich woman who is foolishly indulgent, perhaps because she is lonely. Do you think such people are merely silly, or can their actions cause harm to others? I personally think that the action of such people like Mrs. Pumphrey can cause harm to others, like it caused harm to Tricky. Question 2. Do you think there are also parents like Mrs. Pumphrey? Yes, I think there are parents like Mrs. Pumphrey who pamper their child too much and spoil the child and cause harm to them. Next question. What would you have done if you were a member of the staff in Mrs. Pumphrey's household? A neighbor? What would your life have been like in general? So this you have to write. If you were a neighbor and if you were one of the staff there at the surgery, how would you behave? Okay, what would you do? So whatever you think, you may write over here. Next question. What would you have done if you were in the narrator's place? If I were in the narrator's place, I too would have behaved as the narrator behaved. If you have any other answer, you can write that and you have to give the justification for your answer. That's all for now. See you in the next video.